Without doubt, climate change is the greatest environmental challenge facing the world today. And everywhere you look, you can see what's causing it to change. Us.
Me?
All of us. We all, in some way, are changing the global climate mainly by burning fossil fuels which create greenhouse gases. In fact, if everyone in the world consumed natural resources and generated carbon dioxide at the rate we do in the UK, we wouldn't need just one. We'd need 3 planets to support us. Greenhouse gases act as insulation for the world's atmosphere. And as the global climate warms, the weather becomes more unstable. As the sea gets warmer, it expands like the liquid in a thermometer, and melting ice will add to rising sea levels. The National Trust say that more than 140 miles of the Welsh coastline are at risk from storms and flooding in the next 100 years. It's not just the richest nations that will be affected either. Some of the poorest countries, who produce very little greenhouse gases, will see the loss of their most productive land and their people at risk from hunger and disease. Climate change is inescapable. The fact is that even if we were to stop all emissions now, the greenhouse gases already in the atmosphere would go on warming it for decades. What can we do to reduce our use of fossil fuels and the emission of greenhouse gases? We could decide to go back to the simple life, do without electricity and cars and anything else that causes climate change. Or we could, of course, do nothing. We could try as much as we can to reduce greenhouse gases and plan a more sustainable future for ourselves. Or we could go on using more and more energy and simply rely on technology alone to get us out of the problem. Whatever happens, we're going to continue needing energy over the coming years. The trick is to reduce how much we need and the impact on the planet in creating it. Assuming we're not all going to go right back to basics or content to do nothing, what can we do to produce energy in a more climate-friendly way? Of all the energy we use in Wales each year, this is where it goes. 36% on transport, 20% heating, water and our homes, 10% on domestic appliances and lighting, 21% is used in our industries, and 13% is used in agriculture and public services. Currently, the 16 coal and oil-fired stations in the UK still produce around 30% of electricity, and around half comes from the 7 gas-fired power stations. That's a big percentage of our total electricity production. There is a cost in using fossil fuels, of course. They produce the highest amounts of greenhouse gases and will eventually run out, making us dependent on supply from other countries. Some say that one answer might be to capture the CO2 produced at fossil fuel power stations and store it underground. Others propose greater use of nuclear power, which currently accounts for around 20% of electricity generation. It's true that a nuclear power station emits as little as 5 grams of CO2 for each unit of electricity. However, some independent experts believe the figure could be as high as 140 grams per unit once the used fuel is safely disposed of. So what are the alternatives? At the moment, electricity produced by renewable resources accounts for less than 5% of the power produced. But this could all change. The UK government has announced plans to build up to 7,000 wind turbines offshore, which could produce up to 20% of our electricity needs. There has been an increase in wind farms on land too, although some which were planned have met with fierce opposition. As always, there are different views.
Now, I'm very much in favour of renewable energy, but in general, I'm not in favour of wind farms. I believe that they do they have too much impact on the landscape of rural Wales, causing damage, and that isn't balanced by the degree of cost effectiveness that wind farms actually produce. The second aspect of this is that the power of local government is being taken away to decide where wind farms should be located. Government has imposed direction on where they should go, and is not prepared to allow council to decide how many should go in the same place.
Wind energy is one of the fastest growing forms of electricity generation
globally because it does not directly emit carbon dioxide. It's the most cost-effective of the renewable options, and the technology works now. It can deliver cuts in carbon dioxide emissions today, and opinion polls consistently show that most people support it.
Or should we turn to the power of water to generate electricity? Separating Wales from England is Britain's longest river, the Severn, which also has the second highest tidal range in the world. And is that what makes the Severn barrage plan attractive to many? A barrage built across the Severn estuary from near Cardiff to Somerset could produce 4.4% of Britain's current electricity demand.
The Sustainable Development Commission's report on tidal power indicated that 10% of the UK's electricity could come from the tides. About half of that could come from the Severn estuary if we build a Severn barrage. We recommend that the government should take forward the Severn barrage to feasibility study stage, but make sure we take into account the environmental impact of building the barrage.
The Severn barrage would harm an extremely important wildlife site because it would impound water, drown the mudflats which support tens of thousands of birds, important for fish populations, and there are better ways of harnessing the huge amount of energy in the Severn estuary. Systems like tidal lagoons could be built where they'd hold the water back and release the water so it would generate electricity when that electricity is required. The Severn barrage would generate electricity in 2 short pulses of about 3 hours at a time, generating large amounts of electricity when maybe the demand wouldn't be there to use it.
On a smaller scale, rivers can be used to generate electricity too. Rivers are one thing we've plenty of in Wales, and small-scale hydro schemes have hardly any environmental impact. Or what about electricity from wood? The world's biggest wood-fired power station is set to be built in Port Talbot. It could produce up to 350 megawatts of electricity, and the process is claimed to be low carbon because the carbon dioxide released when the fuel is burnt is equal to that absorbed during the growth of the tree. The sun, when it shines, is also a potential source of free energy. Photovoltaic cells are improving all the time, but unfortunately it's an expensive way of making electricity at the moment. Because electricity demand varies through the day, we can make better use of the electricity we produce if it can be stored until it is needed. Here at Dinorwig, for instance, energy is stored by pumping water up pipes to a reservoir high on the mountain. When demand is high, the water is released and this turns hydroelectric turbines. But should we rely solely on technology to solve the problems that climate change brings? Or should we plan for our future, using new technology whenever it is shown to work?
4/5 of all our carbon emissions come from how we live, so we've simply got to change our behaviour. We've also got to become far more efficient in how we use resources, and above all, we've got to invest in renewable sources of electricity.
And, as well as of looking for ways of producing electricity, we could be looking at ways of reducing the amount we use. Some of us, of course, use very little energy in the first place, but even he could make a difference. As much as 10% of electricity used in a house is due to leaving things on standby.
Really?
That's not only a waste of money, it creates as much as 4 million tonnes of excess carbon. Energy-saving bulbs use 80% less electricity for the same amount of light and last 10 times longer, while LED lights use even less. Climate change will force us to think more carefully about the types of houses we live in. Domestic energy accounts for 30% of all the energy used in Wales. And the average 3-bed house built in the 1930s with gas central heating produces 9 tonnes of CO2 a year. Of course, we could opt for the simple life, living in shelters that cause the minimum impact on the environment, although this life may not appeal to everyone. Even when designing a low-impact 21st century house, we must consider not only how much energy it takes to run, but also the energy used to construct it. Should we be using so much concrete, for example, when it produces so much carbon dioxide in its manufacture? Once built, this passive house minimises the energy needed to run it.
The passive house method is a building system which describes the energy performance of the building. It allows you to use any building systems such as concrete blocks or straw bales. As you see from around you, this is our house currently under construction. It's a super insulated building and it has heat recovery ventilation systems and a very small heating system to meet the heat load.
Locally sourced sustainable materials have been used for centuries and are successfully still used today to construct homes. This house in West Wales uses straw bales for walls, which give very high insulation and doesn't cost the earth. Homes like this produce far less greenhouse gas than traditional homes in their construction. Many Welsh homes are over 100 years old and, by 2050, it's estimated that 70% of all UK houses would have been built before 2007. So what can we do with this huge backlog of inefficient homes? Some argue they're so inefficient they should be demolished. Here in Grangetown, Cardiff, 46 new houses have been built, replacing 4 blocks of 1950s maisonettes which had become run down. The new properties are being built to the latest design standards and include a host of energy-saving and sustainable features such as solar panels, a continuous ventilation system, timber frame construction and ultra-efficient insulation. Wherever you live, there are certain things that you can do in your home to make them more energy efficient. Don't fill your kettle up or turning your thermostat down by 1 degree. Also, loft insulation and cavity wall insulation might cost you at the beginning, but in the end, you are going to be the one saving the money. Many eco-homes incorporate forms of microgeneration with photovoltaic panels on the roof or domestic wind or water turbines.
When we're looking at microgeneration systems for the home, we first need to look at systems that generate heat, such as solar thermal systems or biomass or even heat pumps. Then we can move on to looking at systems that generate electricity, like photovoltaics, wind turbines or hydro systems. But if we're going to generate electricity on a large scale, we need to be looking at commercial scale systems like big wind farms.
All this means that the jobs in the future might well be different, of course. Different methods of construction and ways of producing energy will require new skills to be learnt. The way we all go about our daily work may also have to change.
We've been in business here at TUI for 22 years and the environment and sustainability has always been part of what we do. What we're now working on is redefining the meaning of work, the meaning of jobs, to integrate sustainability into everything we do, from the food, the accommodation, the transport, and most importantly, the way we actually deliver our jobs on a day-to-day basis. If we don't protect the environment, it's not going to be here to look after us.
And not only might we have to consider our jobs in the future, we might also consider where we work. Should we be driving hundreds of miles a week to work, for example? Most forms of transport are powered by fossil fuels. Should we really continue to drive around in gas-guzzling cars when a smaller one would do just as well? Lower speed limits also cut emissions, as does smoother driving, anticipating the road ahead and choosing the correct gear. Governments have increased tax on fuel to persuade motorists to use less fuel. Biofuels such as ethanol, biodiesel or straight vegetable oil are increasingly being used as a transport fuel. Engines can even run on recycled vegetable oil, which is why sometimes passing vehicles smell a bit like a fish and chip shop.
The more we look at biofuels, the more problems that we identify. They're grown on land which should be used to grow food, so the price of food is rising globally. Studies show that sometimes they can use more energy than they actually generate, and also they can destroy rainforests and other important wildlife areas to produce fuels like palm oil, and that is extremely harmful.
Another solution might be to drive hybrid cars, which use both electric motors and petrol engines, or electric vehicles, which can be charged when electrical demand is low.
The best way to address the problem of carbon emissions from transport is not to develop biofuels, but to improve fuel efficiency so that vehicles run far further on less fuel.
But, of course, no single technology will allow us to continue using the 30 million cars on the UK's roads today. So what should we do? We could go right back to basics. Walking is cheap, very environmentally friendly, good for us. And look, it leaves absolutely no carbon footprint. Although it might not appeal to everyone. A bicycle is a very good example of using simple technology to provide reliable, affordable travel. And more dedicated cycleways are being created, often along old railway track beds. Although some closed railways are actually making a comeback too. The reopening of lines such as this one from Ebbw Vale to Cardiff could reduce emissions from commuter traffic. Buses can be an efficient form of transport too, if there are enough passengers. But empty or nearly empty buses are worse than cars. So what should we do about the sparsely populated rural areas of Wales?
Well, even in rural areas, people can often cycle. And also, people need to use the public transport that's there more than they do. But public transport has to be designed to meet people's needs. And then, when it's not possible to provide everything that people need in public transport, it's important to have schemes like car sharing, where you have lots of people, a few cars, and people can book a car just to do the journey that they need to do.
And when you think about all that CO2 adding to the greenhouse effect, what should we do about flying? Nowadays, an increasing amount of food is imported by air. It's why we're able to enjoy tomatoes and green beans all year round, but it comes at a cost in greenhouse gases. If we eat green beans from Africa, they will have been flown. If we eat tomatoes in the winter, they have either been flown, come a very long way by truck, or grown in a heated greenhouse which will have produced even more CO2 than the transport would. But processing food uses even more energy than food miles does. Unfortunately, animals, particularly beef and dairy cattle, also contribute to climate change mainly through the methane they produce. And as the climate changes, food production could change out of all recognition. While warmer climates here may allow us to grow crops we can't at the moment, many other parts of the world will suffer because of drought and soil erosion. The result could be desperate food shortages for many millions of people. Many animals and plants may not be able to cope with these changes either and could die. In fact, up to a quarter of the world's flowering plants could be threatened with extinction over the next 50 years. Amazingly, the vast majority of the world's food comes from just 20 crops in just 8 plant families. And most of these are dangerously vulnerable to diseases, being eaten by pests and a rapidly changing climate. Higher temperatures and reduced rainfall could mean the loss of large areas of rainforest too, on top of all that has been cleared for timber and crops to feed animals or make biofuels. And remember that these forests absorb large amounts of carbon dioxide, which would otherwise be released into the atmosphere. Here in Wales, farming will feel the effect of climate change more than other parts of the UK, because more than twice the number of people are employed in agriculture, forestry and fishing. And while we might be able to grow crops in the future that we can't now, pests, such as aphids, will start to hatch earlier in the year as well. They're already arriving earlier in the year, and the population appears to be growing too.
Well, on the one hand, higher temperatures and higher rainfall could mean that we have better crop yields and better grass yields, or be able to grow lots more different crops and types of forage. But on the other hand, extreme weather events such as high rainfall and high temperatures could mean that we lose crops or we increase soil erosion and affect water quality.
So what can we do? Growing more of our own food is a good option. It means that transport is kept to the minimum and the food we eat is truly sustainable. If we don't grow our own food, we can reduce our carbon footprint by buying locally, although it doesn't always follow that buying local is best. If the food is delivered by a van with an inefficient engine, the carbon footprint could actually be higher than food that has travelled further, but is more efficiently produced and transported. Avoiding unnecessary packaging and processed food when you go shopping can reduce the amount of greenhouse gases we create too. It all adds up. If we reduce what we buy and reuse more, that can have a really significant effect on climate change. And, of course, if we recycle more, that will make a difference too. One of the best things you can do is to ask questions. Question why people are continuing to create needless amounts of CO2 and other greenhouse gases. Question why people are still buying gas-guzzling cars. Question why we're not using public transport more. Question why we're not insulating our homes as much as we could and saving energy whenever we can. Question the way we're producing electricity and heating our homes. Question, question, question. Because the more we discuss climate change, the better chance we have of coming up with real answers, so that the planet, and all of us on it, have a real future.